Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate it. I'm Jessica Gonzalez, and I'm the co-CEO of Free Press Action. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization created to give the people a voice in the decisions that shape our media system. And that's what we're here to do today. Free Press Action has been working very closely with the Disinformation Defense League, or DDL. And you all should have a flyer that gives you a little bit more information about DDL. But it's a distributed national network of over 230 individuals and organizations. These are researchers, organizers, disinformation experts, working specifically to address racialized disinformation that targets Black, Latinx, AAPI, and other communities of color online. Today's briefing is called, she found it on the web, must be true. Today's briefing is a roadmap for digital civil rights. So today we're coming together to hear directly from people in the grassroots about the serious threats that online platforms pose to all of us, and specifically the ways that people of color are being targeted with scams, fraud, and even violence. We will share DDL's policy platform, a call to action for Congress to pass legislation to protect our privacy and civil rights in the internet age. And we have a great lineup. I'm really excited about my colleagues here from the Disinfo Defense League. These folks are from nonprofit organizations from across the country. Many of us flew in, California, Texas, Georgia, to be here with you today. Our experts include Jose Munoz from United We Dream Action, Renata Robinson from the New Georgia Project Action Fund, Yizel Tanglao from the Filipino Young Leaders Program, and Yosef Gatacho from Common Cause. We are also joined in the audience by a number of other Disinfo Defense League experts, including folks from Equis Labs, Stop Online Violence Against Women, PEN America, National Hispanic Media Coalition, and many more. And for those of you just coming in, please grab a lunch, get settled. It's not official till the senator welcomes you, so please make yourselves comfortable. Speaking of the senator, we're extremely pleased to be hosted by two incredible sponsors today. They both have a long track record of ensuring that the voices of people of color are heard in the halls of Congress. We'll hear first from Senator Lujan, then we'll go to our panel of experts, and then we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, and then Congresswoman Clark will close us. With that, I'd like to introduce Senator Lujan from New Mexico. Senator Lujan is chair of the Commerce Subcommittee on Communications, Media, and Broadband that oversees our communications networks. He's been a great partner and a champion of holding online companies accountable. Thank you for being with us today, Senator.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for your leadership and everything you do every day. I've had the honor of inviting Jessica, and I think the country continues to learn from her with her expertise, whether it's a witness at a commerce hearing, the work that she does with encouraging conversations like this, or involving and troubleshooting a team of experts on the various rulemakings throughout America. So thank you for what you do and all of your expertise as well. And to all the members of the panel, thank you for being here, for being willing to come and share thoughts and ideas and ways to make things better. You committed your careers to that. I also want to commend the diversity of the panel as well. It's good to see. We need to do more of that around Capitol Hill, across America. So thanks for doing that, Jessica. Look, there's not enough I can say about Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. I hope you get a chance to hear from her. She's been a great friend and a great partner who I had the honor of working with as a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee as well. And it's an honor to be able to work with her again today. So to her staff and team that are here, I want to commend you and the work that you're doing. Look, the challenge here, as we all know, I don't have to explain this to you. You know what's at risk. You know what's been happening. You know how untrustworthy information, unreliable information can take off in a matter of seconds. And it's not that it's in the ethos, it's the damage that it's doing. And for me, and some of the work that I've done, especially in non-English language, and don't mistake me when I say non-English language, it's bad in English. It's worse in non-English languages, namely Spanish. I've not seen a company that cares about doing a darn thing about it. And now I'm going off script. I'm going to get myself in trouble.
About to get good.
I'm very, very concerned by what we're seeing. And look, I had the honor of having some responsibilities as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, as chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And I saw firsthand the harms that people were exposed to when foreign countries were infiltrating, hacking, and taking advantage of vulnerabilities that exist in our system, many of which are because we don't practice our own online best practices. Not opening up phishing emails and texts and things of that nature. So on that, I hope we can all be more aware ourselves, because we can do a lot with the organizations we work with just there. But then once that information was stolen and hacked, we know from the intelligence community that when some foreign entities like the Russian government gets their hands on information, they'll change it and they'll make it look pretty good. They make those documents look like they were drafted and written in the way that they show them to the country. And they're lies. It's misinformation. It's there to put false thoughts into people's minds and then bake it into somehow reveal itself as the truth. Same thing happened during COVID. I'm concerned of people's health that was jeopardized because of some of the nonsense that was out there. Same thing happened around voting. And now we're seeing revelations that one network knew that what they were putting out in front of the American people were absolute lies. But they wanted eyes. They wanted clicks. So they kept doing it, and they baked it in, and they baked it in. January 6th happens. And then someone else gets their hands on this footage, somehow to say that it was a peaceful protest. I don't know how many of you were here. I was. Was there a show of hands of folks that were around January 6th? I want you to talk to folks. There was nothing peaceful that day. It was scary. And some of the same folks that I've seen defending the nonsense that happened here were the same folks that were running down the hallway. And I was with them. It was a scary day. That's just the beginning of what we're starting to see with misinformation, and when entities sadly are out there that don't care about correcting the nonsense that we see people making money off of. And that's the other part, right, Jessica? When algorithms are being drafted such that there's more profitability from these lies, and the more clicks it gets, and with some of these social media feeds where, you know, something that makes you angry, the algorithms are written so the more people see that stuff, there should be a big concern about this. In addition to our mental health well-being. In the early days of its invasion of Ukraine, Russia launched a deliberate effort to spread disinformation across the United States to erode support for Ukraine. Y'all seen any reports about folks that say that there shouldn't be help to people in Ukraine? I've seen it in the halls of Congress now. That's where it started. This is dangerous. So back home, we saw how a lot of this misinformation led to an individual that ran for public office, organized some people to go shoot up houses of elected officials. That's just one story in New Mexico. This is very concerning. And again, I can't thank you enough for bringing attention so that we can all collectively hold companies accountable. There's more conversations around YouTube and Meta and WhatsApp and TikTok right now. That's just the beginning. More work must be done here. And so I want to work with everyone in this room and again, thank everyone for what's been happening recently. Even the Washington Post is now reporting on scammers using artificial intelligence to fake the voices of family members in distress to scam you out of money. That's terrifying. Think about our parents or our grandparents getting a call like that and then purporting to be one of us. This is not right. Concerns with advances in AI as well are only adding to this. So I commit to using my time in the Senate, namely as the chair of the subcommittee, to work in conjunction to make this better, to hold folks accountable. And look, in the end, the very least that can be happening from social media companies until there's rule changes, they all know what they're doing. They know loopholes that are being created. They know the code that is causing or spreading this information. Choose to stop. Choose to be part of the solution. If we can encourage that and embrace that, things will get better. If they don't, we hold them accountable. And we're going to push together so that voices are heard. So thank you all. Sorry for going over my time, Jessica. Just appreciate what everyone's doing. Thank you very much.
Well, I thought I was fired up when I got here, but, the senator reminded me of two things. Why is this happening? And we're going to hear today numerous attempts to undermine democracy, peaceful transition of power, the right to vote. And why does it continue to happen? It's because we are not regulating these companies and we're allowing them to put profit over people's health, safety, lives, and our democracy. So with that, I'm actually going to sit down and I'm going to join this esteemed panel. And first up is Jose Munoz, who's directly to my right here. He's the Deputy Communications Director at United We Dream Action, a nonprofit immigrant advocacy organization operating in 28 states. And it's the largest immigrant youth-led network in the nation. So Jose, tell us about how targeted disinformation is impacting immigrants and youth.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessica, and super excited to be on this panel with all these amazing folks and the folks at DDL. Like you mentioned, my name is Jose Munoz. I serve as the Deputy Communications Director at United We Dream Action. When I think a lot about the topic that we're talking about today, I think about how, since our inception, United We Dream has really been a leader in pushing back against lies, conspiracy theories, and disinformation that harms immigrants and people of color. When DACA was first won by immigrant young people, we were on the forefront of making sure that we were pushing reliable information. We were seeing young people scammed by notarios and shady lawyers. And so when we're thinking about this topic, I really think about the work that we did really early on to provide that type of information to folks. I also think about the work that we did during the 2020 census to make sure that we were ensuring that immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, were being counted in the census. So as we talk about threats to our democracy, that's a really, really important thing to focus on. And then lastly, I think about the work that we've done around the elections, running really successful programs to inoculate our communities, particularly Spanish speakers, on WhatsApp. When I think about this topic, we at United We Dream really see the topic of racialized disinformation as an existential threat to the lives of Black and Brown people, to the lives of immigrants. And some of what the senator shared with us really stuck with me. And I think one of the ways that I want to ground us as we have this conversation is I'm going to ask that you let me tell you a little bit about my dad, because I think that'll sort of help to illustrate how this is impacting real people. So my dad moved to the U.S. from Mexico when he was 17 years old. He knew no English. He had a 5th grade education, and he moved to be a farm worker in Southern California. He knew nobody, but he made friends with the migrant farm workers that came seasonally. And that was a little bit of how he built community at that time. I'm going to fast forward a lot because in 2014, 2015, my dad joined Facebook for the first time. And my dad travels to Mexico a lot. There's some people in our family who don't have the opportunity to do that. And so whenever he goes, he posts videos and photos, and he gets all the comments and likes from cousins and family and friends. One time I was visiting my dad in Minneapolis, and he was scrolling through his Facebook feed, and he was talking to me about all of the people that he was connecting with on Facebook. And some of those were people that he met when he moved when he was 17 years old to work in the farms. And he was so ecstatic that at the palm of his hand, he was able to connect with people he had lost touch with for decades. I share that because that is really powerful, and that really speaks to the way that people build community and connection on some of these platforms. But that is community that oftentimes can be used against people as well. During the pandemic, my dad spent more time on Facebook, as many people did, because of isolation. And so some of what our conversations turned into was me starting to have to debunk some of the things that he was seeing on Facebook. So it was things, conspiracy theories about COVID-19 and how it spreads. My dad worked as a frontline worker. He never had the opportunity to stay home. And so that was really concerning for me. Eventually, it also led to claims about the efficacy of the vaccine, and really having to have a very deliberate conversation with my dad about the vaccine, making sure that he was able to protect himself and the other families that he lived with. And then also it was really real conversations around some of the posts that he was seeing that were very clearly trying to create racial divisions in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in our hometown of Minneapolis. All of that really solidifies for me that this is about the profits that really line Meta's profits. We're talking about the way that the algorithms push certain pieces of information and content to certain folks. While these are topics that I mentioned that my dad was scrolling through on Facebook, these are topics that have significant dis and misinformation in English as well. One thing that's really important to recognize is that my dad really doesn't speak English. And so it's really important to recognize as we think about the fact that in Spanish, a lot of this content lives on significantly longer. When we're talking about COVID-19 in 2020, there was reports that showed that Spanish language disinformation lived on 70% longer on Facebook or was never taken down. That's wholly unacceptable. And a lot of times this is content that is translated from English. So this is content that would have been taken down in English, but for people like my dad who were scrolling on Facebook in Spanish, that content was never taken down. It's also not just Facebook, so I don't really want to make a conversation about Facebook alone. There's significant research that shows that Spanish language disinformation on platforms like YouTube also lacks the same level of content moderation, policy enforcement, and scrutiny that it does in English. This is really concerning for Latinos and Spanish speakers. They rely on YouTube about 12% more than English-dominant households. And at United We Dream Action, we did research last year about how Latinos consume media, particularly on the topic of immigration. And one of the things that we found was that YouTube was one of the primary sources of information. So when we're thinking about the fact that there's a lack of content moderation on the platform, it's really, really concerning to Latinos. The reality is that these companies also profit from dangerous rhetoric. So there was a report by the Tech Accountability Project that found that Facebook oftentimes monetizes searches, ads, and searches for white supremacist content, specifically content around things like the Great Replacement theory, which is rooted in white nationalism, which is rooted in anti-Semitism. It was also what inspired the shootings in El Paso and Buffalo. And so not to mention that content that they push also keeps really good legislation like citizenship for immigrants from passing. I'll wrap really by saying that I shared the story about my dad because it's important for us to recognize that people use social media to build and find community. And so it's really important that we have policies in place that protect people from that. Ultimately, those who lead social media platforms have one goal, and it's profit. And so while we have engaged with the platforms, it's really important that Congress plays a more active role in making sure that they regulate and force the platforms to act and come to the table with real solutions that meet our community's needs.
Thank you. I recalled research showing that Latinos in particular were targeted with messages online, encouraging them not to participate in the census, or that participating in the census was dangerous or would force ICE to show up at their homes And so this is a basic tenet of our democracy, right? For everyone to be counted. So that made me think specifically about how we are targeted based on our demographics, what color we are, our ethnicity, our language, our immigration status, and just how much data these companies have on us and how they're using it. And we'll get into that when we come to the solutions. It's an important piece. I want to go to Renata Robinson, Director of Research at the New Georgia Project Action Fund. They are building power with and increasing the civic participation of the New Georgia majority, Black, Latinx, AAPI, and young Georgians, and other historically marginalized communities through nonpartisan voter registration, organizing, and advocacy on the issues important to our communities. Renata, can you share about how online conspiracies and scams targeting your constituents have affected civic participation in Georgia?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. I'm Renata Robinson. I work for the New Georgia Project Action Fund, and as Jessica said, our main constituents are young Georgians and Georgians of color, particularly Black Georgians. So, Senator Lujan spoke of AI scams, and it immediately made me think of Twitter. I'm sure everyone in here has heard of blackfishing, right? Where people create accounts and they try to purport that they are Black in order to influence the culture. And so, like as he was talking, I was thinking of all these different scams that we monitor every day. But I want to uplift just a couple that you might not hear regularly. So a different trend that we've been seeing over the last couple of years is coming from within the community. No doubt influenced by bad actors outside of the community, but more and more Black influencers are peddling mis and disinformation. And it's primarily to create a sense of apathy. And so New Georgia Project Action Fund is like committed to engaging our young people and our people of color to make sure that they know that they can exercise their right to vote and other ways of civic engagement. They push messages like the establishment has done nothing for you. Democrats have done nothing for you. And we know that's patently false, right? Like, are Democrats doing everything that everybody wants? Maybe not. But have they done nothing? No. And so what this does is it taps into this sense of cynicism and existing apathy, and it creates a situation where a person looking at it goes, you know what? That's true. And so they either don't vote for a Democrat, regardless of, regardless of issues, values, any of those things, or they just don't vote at all. And in a place like Georgia, where elections are won on the margin, every single vote counts. And we want people to want to speak up and vote the way that they would want to. So the tricky thing is that a lot of times this looks and feels like Black activists speaking up and telling people, fighting for what they believe in. But I really, really want to emphasize today how dangerous this is, not just to the Black community, but also to democracy itself. Also, the argument that Democrats have done nothing for Black folks is false, but it also sows division within the Black community, and it opens the door for right, R-I-G-H-T, right, wing bad actors to piggyback on their messaging, and then they point to the so-called credible actors in the Black community to lend credence to it. Another trend that we saw, particularly in 2022, was that a lot of candidates were misrepresenting their accomplishments on both sides. So either blatantly taking credit for things that they did not do, or not talking enough about the things that they did do. So, for instance, our governor initially criticized President Biden's American Rescue Plan, but then during his re-election campaign last year, He touted the millions of dollars that had been invested in our communities, but never brought up the fact that those dollars were allocated from the American Rescue Plan. And so it creates a dynamic where voters are not really getting the whole picture, and we can't rely on New Georgia Project being in every single place to paint that picture for them. On the other side, we had Stacey Abrams, who was just beat up in press about what she was not doing for Black voters, which also was not true. But it puts an organization like New Georgia Project Action Fund, which is nonpartisan, in a very peculiar situation because, yes, we combat disinformation, but also we have to be very careful to not appear to be campaigning for a candidate, even when the narrative that is out there is false. So what do we do about this? So first of all, New Georgia Project Action Fund, I'm proud to say, is one of the only organizations in Georgia. We may be the only organization in Georgia that regularly polls and surveys and does research about Black Georgians. And so we're able to really figure out what messaging we need to put out there that actually works, what captures people's attention. And then also, I've done a lot of research around what motivates Black voters. And what we know is voting for Democrats, voting for other, even Black candidates are not what motivates them. What motivates them is, as Janet Jackson said, what have you done for me lately? So if we can connect the dots, it's much easier for us to then mobilize people to say, here's what has happened and here's what is possible. Now go out and vote for the things that you want to make happen. But it's our job to correct the record for Black Georgia voters and let them know the facts. The other thing that I do want to bring up is that we have, so number one, we have 2 research associates dedicated to monitoring and pushing back against mis and disinformation. We have a robust policy shop, and my department works with that department to make sure that we're fact-checking and getting the policies in front of people. We also have 2 disinfo research associates that monitor threats online. One of the things that we really have had to do since 2020 is pay attention to the violent sites like 4chan, Telegraph, Truth Social, et cetera, to really know what people are either planning or pretending to plan, because that's another form of disinformation that affects our voters at the polls. If people think that they are at risk of experiencing violence when they get to the poll, of course they're going to consider staying home. And so what my team does is really dig down into, is this a credible threat? Because if it's not, we then need to send our policy and field teams out to make sure that our residents know that they can go to the polls safe and sound. But then we also have apparatus in place so that if something does happen when they're at the poll, they know who to call. Finally, in terms of connecting the dots, which I said earlier, we've put together Ready, Set, Vote. And so one of the things that is super important to me is making sure that New Georgia Project Action Fund and New Georgia Project are seen as trusted messengers. And so in that role, we try to make sure that in every single script, we're telling people what they need to know, whether they ask us or not. So every single time they talk to us, we will tell them when, where, how, why to vote. But then also they can go to this website, put their address in, their sample ballot comes up, they can see what their office does. They can also see the positions for each candidate. And so they don't have to rely on what they're seeing or hearing through the grapevine. They have a place to go to see the actual facts about each candidate so they can vote the way that aligns with their values. So thank you for having me on this panel this morning.
Thank you, Renata. Yeah, that was excellent. I keep saying this morning too. In my mind, yeah. Thank you so much. And when you were talking about, it's not just that communities are being targeted with disinformation. There's not enough journalism actually holding candidates accountable for lies. And so that is also part of the DDL policy platform that Yosef will preview in a few minutes. But before I go to Yosef, I want to go to Lisel Tanglao president of the Filipino Young Leaders Program, which expands the pipeline of Filipino young leaders in the diaspora and supports the socioeconomic progress of the global Filipino community. She is the project director of TAYO, which started out as a COVID-19 virtual help desk for Filipino Americans and is now pivoting to be an innovative data hub. Lizelle, can you shed light on how public health misinformation online is impacting your community?
Thank you, Jessica, Free Press Action, and the Disinfo Defense League, Senator Lujan, and Congressman Clark for the invitation to speak before you today. Like Jessica said, my name is Lizelle Tanglao, and I am the president of the Filipino Young Leaders Program, also known as PhilPro, and I'm also the co-founder and director of its TAYO project. Together, these initiatives work to foster innovation and spark collaborative, multinational relationships in the global Filipino diaspora. In addition, I've spent the last 20 years telling stories as a multimedia journalist in Southern California, New York, and now in Dallas, Texas. During this time, I've worked at some of the biggest news orgs, such as ABC, CNN, HuffPost, and the Associated Press. But I come to you today as an American of Filipino descent, who in the last 3 years, along with my family, friends, and peers, have not only had to navigate an unprecedented global health pandemic that has uniquely impacted the Filipino community, but also highlighted a misinformation pandemic that has threatened the most vulnerable members of our community, our seniors, our frontline workers, and the unemployed. As the third largest Asian Pacific American ethnic group in the US, that's more than 4.2 million strong, the footprint of the Filipino diaspora is undeniable. If you or your loved ones have ever been sick, you have most likely encountered someone that looked like me at a clinic, in the hospital, as a nurse, a doctor, or lab technician, or perhaps as an in-home caregiver or staffer at an assisted living facility. Despite serving on the front lines of America's healthcare infrastructure, this omnipresent group is rarely ever seen or heard in the mainstream media coverage, much less included in conversations around digital civil rights. Although the pandemic has triggered some belated recognition of the heroic efforts of our nation's healthcare frontliners, these workers are bearing the heaviest brunt of COVID-19. They did not have the privilege of staying home to put food on the table or spend every night spending every day placing their own lives for caring for the sickest patients while their own families were grappling with the isolating impacts of this pandemic. A September 2020 report by the National Nurses United found that while Filipino Americans represented 4% of registered nurses in the US, they accounted for almost a third of COVID-19 related nursing deaths at the time. And while these horrors were documented most vividly in COVID epicenters like New York City, Filipino nurses have for decades been vital stopgaps for labor shortages, not just in densely populated urban locales, but countless rural communities as well. So I bring this up to highlight the story of how we, a multidisciplinary, volunteer-led, community-based organization, which up until the pandemic was really only centered on an annual one-week immersion trip, had to quickly pivot and make up for the lack of culturally tailored information about COVID-19 within our community. As young, high-performing leaders representing different